Hello everyone, this is the Primo from GnarlyFPV. It uses the Crazy Bee all-in-one flight controller, the 802 16,000 kV motors, or others that fit, 65mm props. You can use an all-in-one camera, or a Caddx EOS 2, and that's it. Carbon fibers 2mm, motor post to motor post I'm getting 100mm. Mine weighs 30 grams, with the MyLipo battery it weighs just over 53 grams. So you can convert your Mobula 7 into a Primo, or your 75 Pro 2 into a Primo, or build one up yourself. There's also a version where you can use 1100X motors. All these batteries will fit, because it comes with several different battery trays. Hopefully you saw the before the takeoff. Again, I didn't get my battery fully charged. I've got to stop ending these battery cycles before I go to bed thinking that they're charged. But it was close. Not quite all the way there. I suspect we had about a 5% left or something a little less there. But this is, as it says in the craft name and the OSD up the top there, this is the 802 version. It says 80X up there. I put that up there. And it flies very well, and it's actually kind of fun and transitioning that the Mobula or the, as I mentioned, the Beta 75 Pro, or if you happen to have another sort of brushless whoop and you want to transition into something that you can fly a little bit more aggressively outside, this is going to be a good option for that. I have a crash coming up that's pretty dramatic. Darn near hit myself. This is also something, and I left that crash in just as a proof of concept that the durability of the carbon used is good. I didn't have any troubles with it. Of course, if you add a whole bunch of weight, if you try flying a really big battery, and I did have that RaceDayQuads 525 out there, your results might vary because I stayed with the smaller batteries because I did find I got a 3-minute flight time, and for me that's pretty good. You'll see in this flight that we also get a 3-minute flight time. But the flight experience of this thing, you can take this places where you might not be comfortable taking other things. Because you're very unlikely to cause any sort of damage to people or pets or property out there. Also, I don't have any audio on this particular flight because there wasn't much to hear. You know, if you're familiar with the channel, I'll oftentimes have a secondary camera, and I've set that on the table, and I'll use that to synchronize what I hear to the DVR, and I use a little clap to synchronize those two together, so I do that in post. But what I found after a few flights was the camera really wasn't picking up much, and if there was really any breeze on the camera or noises like dogs barking or mowers running, anything like that, you couldn't hear it at all. Now, I could hear it, but the camera that I was using for audio was not picking it up, and therefore we don't have any audio in this particular flight footage. Oh, and there was the crash. Whoa. But we're just going to take off again. That's kind of how I flew this thing. If I crashed, I just took off again. Some of you may be worried about the ESCs popping an ESC. One thing I did avoid was using turtle mode. So if it landed upright and it landed in a space where I could see at least the front props were spinning, then I would go ahead and try to take off, but I was very gentle on the throttle. I don't recommend, you go right to 50% to try to pop up off the ground, because if you have any sticks or debris or grass in those props, you run the risk of maybe popping an ESC. I haven't had any troubles with that, but I know there are people online that have had troubles with flight controllers popping ESCs or otherwise becoming damaged and unusable, because it isn't on one board. One component on the board goes, you're done, you got to get a new board. Generally, I think those boards are coming in around $35 to $40, and you can get those in a lot of different places. Now, some of you are going to be asking me about 3S. I'm willing to test that, and we'll see going forward as I get a few more flight controllers that are the version 2 of the Crazy Bee F4. That's the one that's supposed to be running 3S. I don't know if it's going to be able to run 3S with 1100X motors on these large 65mm props. So hopefully you noticed at the end of that flight where I had the OSD and I went back to the normal flight view, and you could see the voltage that I did come down, and it restored itself once I disengaged the props to 3.5 volts per cell, which is where we want to end. There's not a lot to talk about. I guess I could tell you that the edges are chamfered and the screws are all countersunk so that everything's all nice and flush. You do see some metal components that are used for mounting. Also, probably something that's fairly important to many of you is about the gap for the USB port. You do see we have a little bit of space in there. We don't want things moving around, and I found it was secured quite well. The way the print has been designed, it holds very well. Let me get some of the components out so we can take a look kind of under the hood. So as I showed you in the quick roll, this is the version that you would run 11.0X motors on. I would suggest 11.02 motors for the most part because you want to stay pretty light. I suspect we're going to see a development in the 11.02 motor category, maybe even 11.03s. You could probably run those. I would stay away from 11.04s because your weight starts to go up and then you might suffer some sort of damage. But you do see these components in here and you see the little metal bits. I don't have any idea. I suppose it's just pressure that he's gotten these seated in here. But as you can tell, I mean, I'm putting some pretty good force to it. It's not moving around. So this isn't going to come off. It comes with this piece already on the carbon. So he has done that before it's shipped out. Those battery trays that I had out, you do get a couple options. Those pop right up through these slots here. So you would just line those up and you'd push them through. They have a little edge there on them to, you see the kind of a bulbous part here on the top. So when you shove those through, it'll kind of lock itself into place. And then you take one of the screws, which is included, and you screw them together. Actually, you go this way. I forgot. There's a hole right there in the top, so you can take your hex driver and go right through and then secure that to the carbon fiber. And you do get all three options. You don't have to order these separately. So this version would run two 1S batteries. Like the new Tiny Hoop 333 battery. It fits in there just fine. It's actually a little bit loose. Some of the shorter batteries are a little bit stocky, so you may find you want to put some electrical tape on there to make it stick a little bit more. You can use this sort of tray to put two batteries in it as well. One other tray I forgot to get out is this one, and this is the one where you can use a 1S battery, and it goes in just like this. It does fit fairly snug. I've also got a 520 out here, and I'll show you that. Because batteries are always something that people are looking at. This one actually feels a little bit less thick. So again, you might, depending upon your experience, want to put a little bit of electrical tape or any other sort of substance to bulk the battery up if you do find it slides around a little bit too much. I did find that this size fit all those different batteries that I showed you previously, and just as a proof of concept, I'm going to go ahead and shove the largest one in. I don't suggest you fly with this, but if you like for long cruising flights or you're willing to take the risk that adding this weight may cause additional damage, it is an option that you can pursue. It isn't real easy to get on, but you can see it does go on. And I did find that through use, this did loosen up because most of the batteries were pretty dang tight the first time around. Another proof of concept, RaceDayQuads 350 fits on there pretty nice. Let's go with the GnB, which is basically the same battery. Fits on there pretty easily. The TBS 300. I've got links down in the long section down below to all these different batteries, a bunch of different places you can buy them. You can vote with your dollar on where your battery goes. Also check GnarlyFPV's site, see if he's selling any batteries at the time you're looking at this. This is a relatively new battery, and I do like this battery. This is a MyLipo. I've got a fairly long history with MyLipo, but GnB took over here in the last year and a half. MyLipo does also make that Tiny Hoop battery. Where did that go? You'll see right down here at the bottom where it says mylipo.de. They're made in Germany, a long time battery maker. Their cells, when they get bigger, don't perform quite as well. I do believe Joshua Bardwell in his battery testing had a MyLipo, and it was kind of average, I would say. But when it comes to micro batteries, they do quite well, at least in my opinion. And this does fit. And this is the primary battery I have been flying with. So if you want to fly like I have been flying and having fun, I would suggest picking some of these up, but they aren't cheap. Doing a jump cut here. Some parts arrived tonight. Decided to open the boxes. I was working on the edit, and we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the 11.0X series so that you can get a better idea of what it's like to assemble one if you choose to do that with a separate VTX. Oh, and my shirt. Mr. Wiggles, sorry, Wiggles FPV. He designed these. He's actually a new sticker designer for Tiny Whoop as well. You may or may not know that. He has these shirts for sale on 2 or 3 different sites. You may find that the Redbubble site, which is where I got mine, it's a little bit hard to navigate, a little hard to find him as a designer. Maybe it's easier than I think it is, but I struggle a little bit. You'll find a link down in the video description if you want to look at his designs and the prices of those shirts. I will say that this is a premium shirt, and it's a bit thicker. I bought like 3 different categories of shirts. I think it's the classic tee is kind of the softer, more summer appropriate sort of tee. This one would be more appropriate for cooler weather, which it's still cool right now in the 60s today. Let's get into that 11.0X version of the Primo. So you can see here, I've got pretty much everything set up. So I used a standoff with a screw thread on it on the top part here, and then I just put a screw through the bottom, and then the screw goes down through here. I use the same thing right back here and just kind of spun that down into that hole, and another replication of what we did on the other side over here. So this is kind of what yours would look like if you choose to build kind of that trash can style or separated VTX. I would have to recommend that you also maybe think about putting some foam tape, some double-sided sticky foam tape between the two boards. I did find that these have a tendency with much pressure to come loose. Not that it came all the way loose and would just fall out, but it seems like that potential does exist, at least at how I've got it assembled. Also, we'll take a look at the canopy here. And you see that I've got my Caddx mounted. You get a taste of what that is like. You have to take the two screws out of the back of the camera and screw it in through the mount. Be careful. Once you take the screws out, the back PCB will come out or loose, so you want to try to minimize the amount of dust or debris that you get inside there by keeping that together as much as possible. You may also, if you have a good image, want to take the time to try to seal that up to make sure nothing else seeps in. Use some light glue. Wouldn't use anything permanent, just something like a silicone-based glue to make sure that nothing else gets in there. And then we've got the last bit, which is about our battery tray here. I didn't think this initially would fit. Matter of fact, I had messaged Gnarly about this, but it's tight, but it fits. It's just slightly more snug than the 2S. This is that MyLipo 333 battery, so just a little bit longer version of this one here. Maybe that's a lot longer. Kind of depends on your perspective. Let's go ahead and put the canopy on top, because if you line this up, you may look at this and go, oh no, it doesn't fit. And this is TPU, it'll stretch out, and we'll get that screwed down. You might lose, I guess, if you look at it from that perspective, 2 or 3 degrees of camera angle. But let's get that together and then we'll take another look. Here it is all together, and you do see that we have some clearance below our camera. Hopefully you can see that daylight. Let me move that wire. You do have some clearance below the camera. I don't expect that to have any sort of impact with the main board, even with the top impact, because it is sitting flush right on top of this connector, and it did go down there just fine. Like I said, you probably lose maybe 2 or 3 degrees of camera angle. Of course, I don't have the antenna on there. You might be wondering why I'm doing this mock-up and not actually showing you flight footage, but it's because this is just a mock-up. This board is one of the F4 original versions that's not rated for 3S, and I've got one coming, or I've got actually a couple coming that are rated for 3S, the version 2. They recently popped up on a bunch of websites for sale, so I picked up a couple of those. So this is just a mock-up for now, but we'll take another look at it here just a little bit later after we get those parts in. These are full-speed RC motors, and again, I mentioned this in the video probably more than once. I'm choosing to use these motors because they have the thicker motor stem. You can use the Happy model on the 80X version, but the motor stems are those 1mm motor stems, whereas these are 1.5mm. These are very light motors, though. I don't think you'll find 1102 nearly as light, but part of that weight comes from the lack of stem as well. Something to consider. But really, you can use any motors you want. If you've got a dead motor laying around, you can lop off the end, solder it to your motor wires of the motors that you're choosing to use, so for the easy use of plugs, or if you're the sort that would like to just solder them in, you can solder the wires right to the connector on the flight controller. Generally, you want to do that from the top, though. You see those 3 little plugs right there? That's where I would suggest you solder them. I wouldn't solder them to the pins down here, because that would either limit your ability or take the ability of using connectors away. I will be featuring this on 3S. We have that to look forward to. And on with the rest of the video. So you can fly in 1S configurations, you can fly in 2S configurations. You could probably use your Snapper 7s or Snapper 6 and transition them over to, as if you wanted to pursue that. Again, your performance is going to vary depending upon the motor that you choose and the battery that you put in, because these are sub-hyper micros. I don't know what classification we should give these things, but we're going to need to come up with something pretty soon. The performance can vary. Depending upon what sort of flight you want to have, you may find one motor or one battery setup may be better for you than another. So while I've got the baggie out here, it does come with one set of propellers, and you also get all the screws you're needed to complete the kit. So something I should have done, but I didn't, would be, I would suggest taking some electrical tape and wrapping them around the arms to help secure these wires, and I would keep as much of this wire possibly on top, or at least secured. Maybe you want to run 2 strips, one here, one a little bit lower down, and you want to secure those so if you get a branch or something in there, it doesn't pull it loose, because again, the weak spot of doing this are the motors and the included wires. This is the little harness that you put your all-in-one camera in. It fits just fine. You can see I've used mine in there. You also noted probably that I used a little strip of foam, and I secured those wires that come out of the camera to the board. And then I've got another piece that's actually from when I had it in my Mobula 7, that I've got another piece of foam down here. So if you were to have a real severe crash, that possibility of that board, the back PCB, the VTX part of the camera coming down and touching and shorting should be pretty minimized by the fact I've got that piece of foam in there as well. You can see here we've got a secondary hole. This would be where you run your trash can antenna. So if you had that secondary board for your VTX that is power switchable, you can do that as well. So you put your camera in here, you put it up in the canopy, you screw it in. You pretty much do the same thing for this, for the Caddx camera. And hopefully you can see maybe down in there. Do you see how, well, let me point from the bottom. This area down here, this should seat in there, so you shouldn't have to fuss with it too much between getting it positioned and screwing it in. As you can see there, it's not going to fall out because I've got that in, and then you would use the 2 screws on the back of this little thing that come on your EOS to secure the camera to the back of this. This is 3D printed. You can probably tell that there are little grooves, but I don't know what sort of printer Gnarly has, but I was certainly impressed. Maybe I'm easy to impress in that regard because I'm not very good at tweaking and tuning and setting up my own printer. I'm kind of a basher and just keep doing stuff until it turns out. The only thing I can say that might be an improvement, and I say might because I haven't tested it, is if you have the EOS camera, I can see that if you're in a wind, you might get some wobble. It's probably hard to tell from what I'm showing you in the video, but this does move, but it doesn't move easy. It's hard for me to envision wind blowing this around, but we have a lot of turbulent wind, you know, with the props and everything, so it's possible that this does get moved. It could be that we need to beef this up a little bit. You might be able to do that yourself with some sort of adhesive or building up some foam in there if you do think that that's an issue. I don't think it is, because when I had pristine motors and pristine props, I thought the footage was very, very good, and it was nice and steady. When I had bent shafts on my motors and bent up props, I did find that I would get a little bit of those bobbles and wobbles in the FPV view. The conversion from a Mobula or whatever trash can that you want to do shouldn't take you much more than, I would say, about 30-35 minutes at most, and that's being kind of conservative in my opinion. I do recommend that you do run the XT30 version. You can run the 2 single cells, or you can run a 1 cell, but I just found that, you know, I'm looking for performance. I'm looking for a certain kind of flight feel, and I didn't find that I got it when I was running 2 1S packs. I think 2 1S packs work really good for indoor, and you're a little bit more modest on the throttle. So if you're doing one of these conversions, I do suggest that you run a 2S setup one way or another. An XT30 setup would be what I would recommend. So good fun, a little park flyer, a little transitional sort of frame that you can take your brushless whoop and then move on to some other sort of flight style, and you can have a lot of good times. I'll put a link down in the description box below to Gnarly's website. Again, he sells motors, he sells props, he sells various things, but I didn't find where he had the flight controller on his shopping website, but you may find them on there at another time. You may also find additional motors that you can pick up, so you can do all-in-one shopping if you want to. Otherwise, you'll just have to either already have the parts, or you'll have to acquire them from other sites. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.